All right, ladies and gentlemen, my computer's loading up right here, being a little bit slow today. Okay, it looks like now we are good to go. This is going to be our first lesson of Unit 6. Unit 6 is what I'm going to call imperialism. Now, the AP people call it consequences of industrialization. I call it imperialism because that's the word that I grew up using, and it's still technically correct here. But I do like the title they use, the consequences of industrialization. We just finished Unit 5 and we saw all of the industrialization and people moving into urban areas. And we even looked at the negative impacts of this industrialization as well when we looked at the Communist Manifesto. But now we're going to take this industrialization and start to send it worldwide. We're going to see that if you're an industrial society, you must also be an imperial society. Both of them go hand in hand with one another. You certainly can't be an industrial society without being imperial. Why? First off, if you're an industrial society, you use a lot more resources, and so you need more resources. Where can you get more resources? From other countries. The second thing is that if you're an industrialized society, you need to sell all the things that you make as well. And so, where can you sell things? Well, to other countries that you happen to own. You need more markets for your industrialized society as well. But keep that in mind. Keep the fact that this industrialization is historical context for all the things that we'll be going over here in Unit 6 with imperialism. Let's go ahead and get to our essential questions here today. Now, the title of our lesson today is The Motivations for Imperialism. I'll be looking at the motivations or justifications. And when I say justification, I don't mean that I am justifying imperialism. I mean that this is the justification these individuals used in order to justify their actions. So, our first question is, what were the motivations and justifications for European imperialism during this time? As I mentioned earlier, resources and new markets, but there's going to be other motivations and justifications as well. Number two, in what ways did societies respond to and resist imperialism? Today, we're going to see an action. We're going to see the European action of imperialism. And then in all of our future lessons, we're going to see the reaction or the response to that imperialism. We need to identify the different ways in which those responses took hold. Number three, what were the causes of migration and how did societies receiving migrants respond during this time period? We started to get into this with Unit 5 with industrialization, and we're going to continue to look at this in Unit 6 as well. Let's go ahead and begin with our context. As I said, the Industrial Revolution is context. They need resources and they need markets. In addition to that, Europeans kind of lost those new world colonies. We saw that with the political revolutions like the American Revolution and the Latin American revolutions and the Haitian Revolution. So they need somewhere else to go. Instead of going to the West, now they're going to go south to Africa and east. And we'll get into details about all of that in later lessons. Number two is nationalism. There's just growing nationalism during this time period. We saw the unification of both Italy and Germany, but other countries are also experiencing nationalism. Like I said back in Unit 5, nationalism can be a good thing. You're unifying yourself based on who you are and not who your king is. You may unify based on culture or language or shared history, but too much nationalism becomes jingoism. And it's kind of a funny sounding word, but it does not have a very funny meaning. Jingoism means that you see yourself as superior to others. You love your country like way too much. You think your country is better than everyone else, and you must impose your culture, your values, your society upon others. We're starting to see this during this time period, during the age of imperialism. And we'll see that Europeans see themselves as the more superior culture and try to impose that culture upon those that they are trying to take over and try to engage in imperialism against. In addition to that, all these European countries want to keep up with the other European countries. So we see that if Germany has a bunch of nations and colonies, well, then Britain and France are going to need to get nations and colonies as well. That's how you show your power. That's how you grow your wealth. You kind of have to keep up with the other countries. And the last part is export economies. The Europeans need access to cotton, rubber, palm oil, ivory, diamonds, all of these resources that Africa and other societies like China happen to have. And so Europeans are going to go ahead and get their hands on those. Now, like I said today, we're just looking at the motivation. So we'll be looking at Europeans today, and then we'll have one day for each part of the world that Europeans end up going to. So Africa, then we'll have Asia, and then we'll even talk about like Australia and India as well. So we'll make sure to hit up all of those countries there and look at imperialism through their point of view as well. So first of all, what is imperialism? I've used the word a lot. Let's actually get a definition. It's a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. You're going to expand your power either by making a negotiation or making a deal with another country, or by bringing in your military and just firing bullets and taking over. This is going to start in the 1870s as Europe establishes empires in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and is going to last, I put, until World War One, but it even goes on after World War One. We see some imperialism all the way up to World War Two. So this is going to last a while, and the impact of this is going to be incredibly long term, as I'll be showing in future lectures. What are the motivations here? The first one is the social Darwinist ideology. So hopefully we know who Charles Darwin is from our science class, but if you don't know, in 1859, a scientist, Charles Darwin, goes to the Galapagos Islands and determines that there's something called natural selection, that some animals are naturally selected to survive while others are not naturally selected to survive. And he uses finches and other animals in order to determine these things. Well, Charles Darwin doesn't ever make any comment on human beings, but people like Herbert Spencer and Francis Galton, who's pictured here, do. They say that these ideas could also apply to human beings. Who are the ones who are successful and fit for society? Well, Europeans happen to have way more wealth than anyone else. Is it because Europeans are just naturally superior to everyone? No, it's because of all of the things that happened in Unit 4, all the colonization that we saw in Unit 4 during the Age of Exploration, all the access to goods and resources, all of that is what has produced wealth for the Europeans. However, people like Herbert Spencer state that this is a reason, or this is the way to show that Europeans are superior to other races, and therefore Europeans should engage in imperialism. And we're going to see how this social Darwinist ideology is used in just a couple slides, in case you're unsure of the practical applications of social Darwinism. We also see that there's a lot of pseudoscience. So pseudoscience just means fake science, which is used for justification. This image right here was created in 1890 and shows the natural progression from gorilla all the way to the white European here. We see that this is a gorilla, and then this is the supposedly Australian, and then a black man here, an American Native American, and then an Asian individual, and then the European. So this gorilla is supposed to be the lowest, and the European is supposed to be the highest based on the shape of their skulls. The more your skull looks like a gorilla skull, the lower you are. At least that's the mentality. Once again, this is all fake, complete pseudoscience, but it's still used as a justification. As Europeans say, look, we are the ones who are smart, we're the ones who are intelligent, therefore we have the right to go to other places in order to impose our culture upon them. Our culture is better, their culture is worse, we're going to change things for them. That's the idea here. This is the practical application of that. This is what the justification looks like in real life. There is something called the civilizing mission, or as I like to call it, the white man's burden. The white man's burden is this idea that the white man has the best culture, and we just saw social Darwinism and the pseudoscience there, and that they need to civilize the savages of Africa and Asia in order to save the societies from themselves. So the white man is going to impose schooling. The white man is going to impose Western culture. The white man is going to impose the Christian faith in order to save the souls. All of these things are going to be imposed upon these other non-European cultures. As you can see in the political cartoon here, this caricature of a white man and caricature of an African are present here, and the white man is carrying the African up the hill, and this says schoolhouse. I know it's difficult to see there, but it's supposed to be the white man's burden. He is carrying the African maybe even against the African's will, in order to civilize him and make him more like the good, strong white man. That's at least the idea here. Once again, these are not my ideas. These are just the justifications and thoughts that were used in order to during this time period in order to engage in imperialism. We even see this with Rudyard Kipling. He's the author of the Jungle Book, but he wrote a letter to Theodore Roosevelt in 1899. At this time, the United States was wondering whether it should become a world power or not, whether it should engage in imperialism just like their European counterparts did. Rudyard Kipling writes this poem. He's a very good writer. He writes this poem to Theodore Roosevelt to encourage him to engage in imperialism, to take upon the white man's burden. It says, "Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go send your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. Go to the Philippines, go to these other non Western places, send your best men there because those men are going to provide good culture and good society for the people who are there. They don't have Western culture. You need to give it to them. To wait in heavy harness are on fluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child." And I'll stop there with that one because I want you to see that that is the mentality of many of these people, many of the Europeans who are engaging in imperialism. They're not overthrowing or getting rid of people. They're overthrowing and changing the culture of people who are beneath them. They're half devil and half child. Half devil, half child is referring to the people who are already there, whether they are African or Asian or Filipino. It doesn't matter. That is their point of view. That is the European point of view. And this poem is supposed to justify taking upon the white man's burden. Let's go ahead and move on to this here. What we see on the left over here is this is two Frenchmen in Algeria. France had taken over Algeria, as we're going to talk about in our next lesson. And in order to impose their culture, they started teaching the Algerians French, as you see here. Fast forward, this is 2018. The Chinese, today, the Chinese government also engages in imperialism. It's a little bit different, but it's economic imperialism in which the Chinese come into many places on the continent of Africa and state, look, we're going to give you everything you want. We're going to give you new highways, new bridges, all this great infrastructure. We're even going to teach all of the people in your cities as well. All you have to do is give us all of your resources. Give us the diamonds, the gold, all of that, and we'll take care of everything else. So we see a Chinese individual teaching Chinese to African children in Tanzania. There are many similarities here, so it's important to keep this in mind that imperialism hasn't gone away. We still very much feel the impacts of imperialism, and there's actual, real, legitimate imperialism still in the world today as well. Let's go ahead and move on to another motivation: nationalism. I already talked about this a little bit with the growing sense of nationalism in Europe. One, these countries want to expand their borders in order to empower themselves, but they also just want to keep up with other countries. After all, if France gains more colonies and gains more power, they might be able to take over Germany. So Germany certainly doesn't want to lose out to France, so they have to take more colonies as well. But there's also this idea of us versus them. As these societies get more and more nationalistic, they have this idea of we are the good people, we have the good culture, everyone else has the bad culture. That includes other European societies, so we can't let them impose their culture, and that includes African and Asian societies. So we have to impose our culture upon them in order to make them better as well. You can start to see how this is going to lead to World War I. If every single country has the mentality of we are the good country and we need to impose our culture on others, yeah, a big war is going to happen, as we're going to see in our next unit, which is Unit 7. We also see and motivations for imperialism are economic motivations as well. So you can gain a whole lot of money. If you have access to those resources, obviously there's going to be a lot of money that you can make. But in addition to the access to resources, there's also the access to markets. Not only do you need the resources to make those manufactured goods, you need someone to sell them to as well. It's important to have colonies if you're trying to sustain as an industrialized society. This is very similar to the ideas of mercantilism that we looked at in Unit 4. Get resources from the United States and sell it back to the United States at a very high price. The only difference in here in Unit 6 is that it's Africa and China, not the United States. The last one here is the religious conversion as well. So we've seen religion be used as a justification. When we looked at Unit 4, we said that God, glory, and gold, focusing on God for this one, were the justifications for colonization. Same thing here with imperialism. The Europeans feel the need to save the souls of savages in Africa and China and India and other places that don't know the Western form of Christianity. So both Protestants and Catholics are going to send missionaries in order to convert the savages and save their souls. We're going to see that this plays a huge role in China with the Taiping Rebellion, but we'll get to that on another lecture. This is the last couple things right here that I want to go over very, very quickly, and then I'll go ahead and stop this lecture. The Conference of Berlin in 1884 is really what kicks off what we call the Scramble for Africa. The Scramble for Africa is a pretty simple idea. Europeans scramble because they want to go very quickly in order to gain as much African territory as possible. In this political cartoon, we see Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of Germany here, is cutting up Africa. And he's going to give a slice of his pie to all of his friends here as well, who represent the other European countries. He's going to say, look, you, Italy, you get this part of Africa. You, Britain, you guys get this part. Germany, you get this part over here. He's splitting up. One thing I want to point out is that there are no Africans at the table. This is a key part here. Europeans are dividing up Africa as if no one lives there. And that's going to have very long-term consequences. And we're going to see an example of that in our next lecture. And the reason it has long-term consequences is because they, as in Europeans, may be dividing these certain homelands. So you might have a big African society that now gets divided between Germany and France, let's say, hypothetically. Or you might get two African societies that are close to one another, who hate one another and are against one another, but now because of the way the Europeans cut up Africa, now they're in the same state, or they're both a part of a French colony or a German colony or a British colony, and they're in there together. Obviously, that's going to be terrible for Africa in the long term. And as I said, we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about this more when we actually look at Africa, but I do want to look at this map here. What you see here is that here are all of the African societies that already existed in Africa well before the Conference of Berlin. After the Conference of Berlin, they all get divided up into these different European colonies or European protectorates, depending on what type of imperialism it is. As you can see, this is going to be catastrophic because you'll see exactly what I was talking about. Some societies get split between two different colonies. Some societies get lumped in together in the same colony. So this is going to have a drastic impact for Africa. In our next lecture, we'll be looking at Africa specifically in order to address the long-term consequences of imperialism, but also look at some of the responses Africans had to imperialism as well. I'll see you guys then.